On October 13th, 1983, 5 friends, Mark, Lisa, Tom, Sarah, and Danny, packed up Tom's old pickup truck and headed to a secluded cabin deep in the woods of New Hampshire. They were eager to escape the stress of city life for a weekend filled with laughter and camaraderie. As they drove deeper into the forest, the trees became denser, their shadows thick and foreboding. Mark sat in the back, trying to shake the unease that settled in his stomach as they passed the last sign of civilization. The cabin was a family heirloom, a place Tom had spent his childhood summers, but even he had begun to sense the eerie atmosphere. Upon arrival, they were met with an old, weathered structure standing defiantly among the trees. The paint was peeling, and the porch creaked ominously as they approached. A cool breeze swept through the clearing, and Mark shivered, though he brushed it off as just the chill in the air. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. A fireplace stood at the center, and the living area was filled with rustic furniture. They unloaded their bags and quickly settled in, the sound of laughter echoing off the walls as they cracked open a few beers. "Let's play some cards," Lisa suggested, pulling out a deck. They gathered around the table, and for a while the worries of the outside world faded away. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere shifted. The light dimmed and the wind howled outside, making the cabin creak. Mark felt a growing sense of unease. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. "Anyone else feel that?" Mark asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Feel what?" Sarah replied, glancing up from her hand. "Like we're being watched," Mark said, scanning the darkened corners of the room. "Stop it! You're just scaring yourself," Danny laughed, but Mark could see the flicker of unease in everyone's eyes. They tried to shake off the tension, but it lingered like a heavy fog. After a few more rounds of cards, Tom stood up, stretching. "I'll get some firewood," he said, grabbing his jacket and stepping outside. "Be quick, it's cold out there," Lisa called after him. Mark felt a sudden pang of anxiety. "I'll go check on him," he said, already moving toward the door. "Mark, it's just firewood," Sarah exclaimed, but he was already outside, the chill of the night air hitting him hard. The woods were eerily silent, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Mark called out for Tom, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy of trees, and he felt the creeping sensation of being watched again. He spotted Tom at the edge of the clearing, his back turned. "Hey man, you all right?" Mark asked, but Tom didn't respond. He stood rigid, staring into the darkness. "Tom?" Mark called again, a chill of unease running down his spine. Finally, Tom turned to him, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Hear what?" Mark asked, glancing around nervously. "Something out there. I swear I saw something moving," Tom stammered, his eyes wide. Mark felt a shiver of fear creep up his spine. "Let's go back inside," he urged. "Whatever it is, it can wait until morning." As they returned to the cabin, the sense of foreboding deepened. The fire crackled softly, but the warmth of the flames did little to alleviate the chill in the air. "Just a trick of the light," Danny said, trying to dismiss their fears, but Mark could see that he was shaken too. They decided to turn in for the night, hoping that sleep would ease their minds. Mark lay in his sleeping bag, tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that something lurked just beyond the walls. His mind raced with images of shadows and glowing eyes. In the dead of night, he was jolted awake by a loud crash outside. He shot up, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, glancing around at the others who were now wide awake. "What was that?" Lisa breathed, fear etched on her face. "I don't know," Mark replied, adrenaline coursing through him. "I'll check it out," Tom said, rising from his sleeping bag, but Mark grabbed his arm. "No, stay here." But Tom shrugged him off and stepped outside, leaving the door ajar. The chill of the night seeped in, and Mark's stomach twisted with anxiety. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Just wait," Mark urged, staring at the door, willing Tom to return. Moments stretched into what felt like an eternity before Tom finally came back, his face ashen. "There's something out there," he said, his voice low and shaky. "What do you mean?" Danny asked, panic rising in his tone. "I don't know. I just felt like I wasn't alone," Tom said, his eyes darting to the window. Before anyone could respond, a low growl echoed through the trees, reverberating off the cabin walls. Mark's heart raced, and he glanced outside, straining to see through the darkness. "What was that?" Lisa gasped, her face pale. "Something's out there," Mark said, fear tightening around his chest. "We need to lock the door." They hurriedly secured the cabin, adrenaline flooding their veins. As they huddled together, the sound of something large moving outside grew closer, the growling rising in intensity. "Should we call for help?" Sarah suggested, but her voice was laced with terror.
"Out here? No one would hear us," Danny shot back, eyes wide. Hours passed, each moment dragging on as they listened to the creature circling the cabin. The growls became deeper, more menacing, echoing in their ears. "Let's stay quiet," Mark whispered, though his own voice shook. It might lose interest. Suddenly, the cabin shook as something slammed against it. The sound reverberated through the walls, and they all jumped in unison. "It's trying to get in!" Tom yelled, panic flooding his voice. "Don't open the door!" Lisa cried, her voice breaking. The growling grew louder, closer. Mark's heart raced as he grasped a heavy log from the fireplace. "If it gets in here, we fight," he said, trying to rally his friends. The door rattled violently as the creature pressed against it, its breath a hot gust of wind that sent chills down their spines. "Hold it!" Mark shouted, bracing against the door with all his strength. But the door splintered under the pressure, and a low howl filled the air. In a moment of desperation, Tom lunged for the window, trying to see what was outside. "We need to run," he shouted. But as he pulled the curtain back, he froze. "It's right there." Mark turned, and through the window he caught a glimpse of the creature. It was towering, its eyes glowing like coals in the darkness. It had an elongated form, obscured by shadows, and its jagged teeth glinted as it snarled. "Get away from the window!" Mark yelled, pulling Tom back as the creature lunged forward, slamming its massive body against the cabin. The walls shook, and they all scrambled to the back of the room, hearts racing. They could feel the creature's breath against the glass, heavy and fetid. "Is this how it ends?" Danny murmured, eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, the power flickered, and the lights went out. They were plunged into darkness, the only sound the furious growling outside. "Stick together!" Mark shouted, trying to keep the group calm. "We can't let it divide us!" They felt their way through the cabin, their hands brushing against the walls as they tried to navigate the chaos. With the lights out, they were completely vulnerable, each noise amplified in the silence. The growling stopped, and for a moment, the cabin fell silent. "Maybe it left?" Sarah suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Mark could respond, the front door exploded inward, splintering into pieces as the creature lunged inside. "Run!" Mark screamed, pushing the others toward the back door. They barreled out of the cabin into the woods, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The night was cold and dark, the trees looming like menacing giants around them. "Where do we go?" Lisa cried, panic gripping her. "Just keep moving!" Mark shouted, leading the way through the underbrush, branches clawing at their clothes. They ran blindly into the darkness, fear fueling their every step. Behind them, they could hear the creature crashing through the trees, its growls echoing like thunder in the night. "Split up!" Tom shouted, and Mark felt a wave of panic. "No, we can't." But it was too late. The others were already scattering into the woods. Mark grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her along with him as they veered to the left, desperately trying to put distance between themselves and the creature. They stumbled through the underbrush, panting as they tried to catch their breath. "What if it finds us?" Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "Just keep running," Mark urged, glancing over his shoulder to see if the creature was still pursuing them. The sounds of the forest were deafening, the wind rustling through the leaves and the distant cries of animals. But beneath it all, the growling remained, relentless and haunting. After what felt like an eternity of running, they finally came to a clearing. Mark scanned the area, searching for any sign of safety. "We can hide behind those rocks," he said, pointing toward a cluster of boulders. They slipped behind the rocks, trying to catch their breath. The growling was closer now, the sound reverberating through the ground beneath them. "Do you think it saw us?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Mark replied, heart racing. but we can't stay here for long." They huddled together, listening intently as the creature drew near. The sounds of its movement were unmistakable, heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, a low growl resonating from deep within its throat. Just as they thought they were safe, a shadow fell over them, and Mark's heart dropped as he looked up to see the creature looming above, its eyes glowing fiercely in the darkness. "Run!" Mark shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand as they bolted from their hiding spot. They sprinted through the trees, fear propelling them forward as the creature charged behind them. Mark felt his legs burning, desperation pushing him onward. "We can't let it catch us!" he shouted, but he could hear the creature gaining ground. Suddenly, Mark spotted a path leading down the hill. "This way!" he yelled, dragging Sarah along as they raced toward it. The ground was uneven, and they stumbled, nearly falling as they navigated the treacherous terrain. But as they reached the bottom of the hill, they found themselves in a clearing, the moonlight illuminating the area. They paused for a moment, gasping for breath, scanning the shadows for any sign of the creature. "Where are the others?" Sarah asked, panic rising in her voice. "I don't know," Mark admitted, his heart racing. "We need to find them." Just then they heard a scream pierce the silence, echoing through the woods. It was Lisa. "Come on!" Mark shouted, pulling Sarah toward the sound. They ran, their hearts pounding in their chests as they fought through the underbrush. They reached another clearing, and Mark's breath caught in his throat. Lisa was backed against a tree, her eyes wide with terror. The creature loomed over her, its jagged teeth glistening in the moonlight. "No!" Mark screamed, but it was too late. The creature lunged forward, and a chilling howl filled the air as darkness enveloped the clearing. Mark felt a surge of horror as the reality of their situation hit him. "We need to run!" he yelled, grabbing Sarah and pulling her back into the woods. They sprinted through the trees, the sounds of the forest merging into a cacophony of fear and chaos. The growling echoed behind them, a constant reminder that they were not safe. But just when they thought they were free, they stumbled upon a familiar sight, the cabin. It loomed before them, dark and foreboding. "What do we do?" Sarah gasped, panic in her eyes. "We can't go back inside," Mark exclaimed, glancing over his shoulder to see the creature closing in. But there was nowhere else to go. With a heavy heart, Mark pushed the door open, and they rushed inside, slamming it shut behind them. The cabin was dark, shadows creeping along the walls. They barricaded the door with furniture, their hearts racing as they listened to the sounds of the creature outside. "Is it gone?" Sarah whispered, fear etched on her face. "I don't know," Mark replied, trying to catch his breath. The growling grew louder, a low rumble that reverberated through the cabin. They huddled together, waiting for the inevitable. And then, the door exploded inward, the force knocking them off their feet. "Run!" Mark screamed, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the back of the cabin. But it was too late. The creature lunged forward, its jaws snapping just inches from Mark's face. They stumbled backward, and in a moment of desperation, Mark grabbed a heavy log from the fireplace and swung it at the creature. The blow connected, and the creature howled in rage. "Keep going!" he yelled, pushing Sarah toward the back door. They darted outside, but the creature was right behind them. They bolted into the woods, the darkness swallowing them whole as they ran for their lives. Branches whipped at their faces as they sprinted through the trees, but they couldn't stop. The creature's growls echoed behind them, a chilling reminder of the danger they faced. As they ran deeper into the woods, Mark spotted the faint glow of lights in the distance. "That way!" he shouted, pointing toward the lights. They sprinted toward the light, hope surging in their chests. But just as they thought they were safe, the creature lunged again, knocking Mark to the ground. "Sarah!" he shouted, reaching for her, but she was already running toward the lights, fear propelling her forward. With a surge of adrenaline, Mark pushed himself up, adrenaline fueling his escape. He followed Sarah, desperation clawing at him as he stumbled toward the lights. They finally burst into a clearing, and Mark's heart sank as he saw a group of campers gathered around a fire. He sprinted toward them, screaming for help, but the campers looked up in confusion, eyes wide with terror. Before Mark could reach them, the creature emerged from the shadows, towering over him, its eyes gleaming with hunger. "Get back!" Mark shouted, but it was too late. The campers scattered in all directions, screams filling the air as the creature lunged forward, its growls drowning out the sound of panic. Mark felt the world blur around him as he ran, fear gripping his heart. He turned back toward the cabin, but it was already swallowed by the darkness. The last thing he saw was the silhouette of the creature as it vanished into the night, leaving nothing but silence in its wake.